Welcome back to the Magic of the Spheres podcast. This is Sabrina Monarch, and this is a show about spiritual lifestyle and personal evolution. I'm an evolutionary astrologer, a clairvoyant, and a thought leader, and I started this podcast to have eclectic and impactful conversations about astrology, as well as all things spiritual and personal development. All right, I'm bringing back one of my astrological obsessions, which is reflecting on the fixed signs of the zodiac, Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius, to talk about some of the deeper alchemical mysteries of this life. It doesn't matter if you have placements in these signs or not. I find that the principles of these signs speak deeply to profound creativity in nature. It relates to our survival, it relates to our erotic creativity, and it relates to our ability to break through stagnancy and trauma and to enter more liberated channels of being. So I want to talk about embodiment in particular through the fixed signs. An embodiment, if we just want to give a simple working definition, I'm speaking to the soul essence inhabiting and expressing through the body. So this is being seated in the body as opposed to being split or dissociated from the body. And of course, these splits and these dissociations happen for reasons. There's traumas, there's, ways of coping that involve just like leaving and not fully being here. But when it comes to, wanting to live your life really fully, I find that this question eventually reaches a question of embodiment, because you can have a dazzling mind, you can be theoretical, but if you want your dreams and visions to be grounded into physical reality, being embodied in your own physical vessel is a way to do that. And I like thinking about the fixed signs and their principles in relationship to the path of embodiment. And I want to illustrate in this episode some of these ways of thinking. We can isolate Taurus themes, Leo themes, Scorpio themes, and Aquarius themes, but you will see that a lot of these signs, they're activating one another. They form what is called the grand fixed cross. So Taurus is squaring Leo and Aquarius and opposite Scorpio. Leo is squaring Taurus and Scorpio and opposite Aquarius, so on, right? So they're all really dynamically creating friction with each other. And why I think it's really powerful to reflect on the fixed signs and play with them is that when, the fixed signs hold energy, they hold creative cultivation, they hold patterns, and a lot of that really benefits us. They also hold on to stagnancy, right? Like there's a weight or a density to the fixed signs. And so if you cultivate life-affirming and positive patterns in any of these signs and the domains of life they represent, it is going to create a lot of positive friction and momentum for you. And likewise, if you have a block or a stagnancy, it affects the other signs as well. And working through, if you're thinking about like the mutable signs, they're so much more fluid and diffuse, and it's easier for change to happen because the mutable signs are about change, and they're really not necessarily like deeply gripping. They're more windy and diffuse. The fixed signs have like a clunk, a heaviness, a density, a firmness, and playing with that aspect of our lives, like that's our deep unconscious. That's like the grooves that are wired in our nervous systems. Those are our deepest patterns. That's the deepest breakthrough. So that's a little intro about why I'm passionate about the fixed signs. I am also offering a new reading, a consult type, which is called Eros and the fixed signs, where I'll be looking at asteroid Eros as well as the houses ruled by the fixed signs to explore questions of aliveness in the natal chart. And rather than getting deep into talking about that consult, I'm just going to illustrate some things about these signs and come back to telling you about that opportunity to work together. So let's talk about Taurus first, which is the sign that is so obviously about embodiment. It's an earth sign, and it is literally about the body. It's our survival. It's our relationship with abundance versus scarcity. It is our sensuality. It is our relationship to ourselves, our self-esteem, and our ability to be resourceful, our relationship with resources, as well as physical pleasure and sensations. Taurus can be very supple and receptive, and it can also be very blocked or unreceptive. So you can think of soil, and if it is fertile and able to grow plants and fruits, or if it's like really dry and packed and nothing can grow there. And what makes Taurus, the Taurian experience, more fertile is simply developing relationship. And that can be very slow, like a cultivation process. For example, for a person that has a difficult time feeling their body or feeling pleasure, they may not be able to expect themselves to just be like crazy orgasmic and in this like deep peak experience pleasure state at the snap of their fingers. Like they might actually have to work up to spending time opening up to their own touch and meeting all the feelings that come up inside of doing that. So this is a very slow sign, right? This is our ability to really feel our bodies. And this will get into Aquarius a little bit, which we haven't gotten there, but Aquarius is where we involve the nervous system and the kind of electrical field of the body and the experience of being triggered, right? The experience of like what is in range, like what we can be with versus where we kind of go berserk in whatever form that we do, right? Like if you are experiencing a physical sensation that freaks you out so much that you go into a hypochondriac like rabbit hole, or if you have turn on in your body, but for whatever reason, that's not okay to feel and you have to suppress it or act out on it in an addiction kind of way and then feel shame and then repress it and then act out on it again, etc. Right? Or if like someone gives you a compliment and you start squirming, right? Or that there's a tension placed on you. Like all these different kinds of things that can come up where what are you feeling in your body and does your physical vessel embrace that? Are you able to be with it? Even if it's not enjoyable. And I think the reality is that unless you cultivate your relationship to sensation, there will simply be sensations that are just kind of off limits or, we don't feel grounded or integrated inside of them. So we'll be speaking about that concept throughout the signs. But in Taurus, we're looking at something, very simple, basic, like what is the physical sensation? Just point blank, what is it? And this kind of duality between if we are opening and exploring and kind of going into deeper channels of connection to sensation, or cultivating and playing with it, or if we just kind of shut it down. So, Taurus can be a little bit about our habits. An example that is really relevant for Taurus is like with foods and favorite foods. And if there's a kind of food you like and you just eat it every day, you're like, this works for me. And now I'm eating it all the time. And how the first time maybe that you tried the food, it was like such a sensational moment, very vivid. And the more repetitively that the food is eaten, the less sensational it becomes, but it's comfortable. And understanding that that's part of Taurus, that can work to our benefit. And it can also be a place of stagnancy. So, one way that it could work to a person's benefit is, say, in the realm of finances, where money is a very Taurus Scorpio, right? Taurus being like our own assets and Scorpio being shared. But money is very connected to survival, right? Like if we weren't in a commerce system, Taurus would more exclusively say be about like your physical body. Can you hunt? Can you gather food? Like how resourceful are you to survive? This is increasingly abstract in commerce society because you trade your particular skills, your particular assets, what you're good at, for currency. And the entire experience of attaching a financial or monetary value to something that belongs to you, your your work, your body, your talent, etc., is a really sensational process. Some people don't even want anything to do with it. Some people are disgusted with money. And yet at the same time, this creates a lot of suffering because money is like a needed thing to get by in the world. And so we're already getting into Scorpio a little bit and like deep emotional, psychological stuff. But this is why Taurus is connected to Scorpio, right? Like anything related to your assets, what belongs to you, assets being money that belongs to you, or things that you can trade for money, or things that you can trade for love or belonging. There's a lot of emotional intensity that comes up around that. So, back to the point though about things becoming increasingly less sensational, sometimes people have a lot of tensing, bracing, kind of freak out happening in the body when it comes to spending or receiving money. And so the moment of commerce exchange is very charged electrical triggering. We can see Taurus, Scorpio, Aquarius all over that. And if you train and condition yourself to be able to spend and receive more easily, then you can notice yourself moving larger amounts of money and it not being the end of the world. And that can be really great. So I've had a journey with that, for example, in like I feel like I back myself when I buy things that are important to me. I don't have, I don't like have guilty purchases or something like that. I'm pretty okay with how I spend money and I'm pretty okay with receiving it. But that was something that I had to work to cultivate, but it also really mattered to me. And, I think there's a little bit of like a square here to say Leo, where Taurus and Leo can be about pleasure and joy. And so if you want to enjoy food, you want to enjoy sex, you want to enjoy what you're wearing, you want to enjoy how you smell, you want to have fun and be able to go to events and that you have to pay for, etc. Like there's something about just owning like I want this, I'm okay that I want this, and I'm willing to engage commerce as needed to express myself in the financial and earthy world. But yeah, this kind of conditioning of sensation to be able to recognize, like, say you really value a romantic partnership, you want it, right? But if every time you go on a date, you have an extreme trauma response, or you're like really deep in your attachment traumas, it's hard to stabilize grounded, healthy connection. And so there can be this kind of slow process of developing more and more safety inside of relationship and inside of connection so that it's not so intense or such the end of the world to be in an intimate encounter. And so just recognizing that, like, Taurus is that ability to feel safe and grounded, which doesn't necessarily look like being calm and serene and, like, quote, regulated, but it just means that you feel safe and secure. And that safety and security may be inside of more passionate or more activated activities. Like if you are having a process of learning how to feel safe in conflict, or feeling safe in your anger, or feeling safe in your erotic turn on, you might not be calm. You might be. Either way, the principle of feeling secure and able to be with your own experience is Taurus. And one last thing for Taurus before we move on is that from an embodiment perspective, this can also be about creating connection with range, and range being more of an Aquarius topic. As in, we can get very habitual about how we like reach for pleasure states. And the less sensitive we are with Taurus, the more that we kind of need a lot, right? Like we need a lot of speed or pressure or intensity to feel a little bit. Or we need a lot of physical, like we need to buy all this stuff and it's never enough. And if we can develop sensitivity with a little bit, then we can open and deepen, and we're more resourceful. We don't need as much. And we can still open to, it is relevant sometimes to like have a big appetite or to, need a lot. But it's different to have resources come through an open and supple system as opposed to being closed, braced, gripping, and trying to like feed a lot of energy through that. I also just wanted to make the note that, like, for different systems, different nervous systems, if you were to like slow down and give yourself an oil massage and go really slow, some people might love that. You just like melt into that. For other people, it could bring up a lot of grief or anxiety. For the same person, they might have both of those experiences on different days. And so there is something with Taurus about just questioning our habits a little bit, where maybe you don't have to eat the same thing every day, or you don't have to follow the same exact sequence to self pleasure yourself, same fantasy, same sequence of touch, and become deeply ingrained in like this worked once and now I'm going to do it over and over again. That this, is part of what creates such a deep wiring in the fixed signs, where it might be something kind of benign, something kind of whatever, but also some of our more difficult, shadowy, etc. patterns are very deeply grooved. So when we create more suppleness in Taurus and the ability to be with different types of sensations and to experience different routes to pleasure and enjoyment instead of just our creature comforts, we really open up possibility in our lives in a bigger way in general, beyond just somatics. So next up is Leo. And this is our relationship to being centered in our experience. Taurus is also that kind of like self-love. Leo is like centered in our own vision, in our capital S self. It's inhabiting the main character energy in our lives. This is being playful, dramatic, big, and full of life. This relates to our inner child. And children's big emotions are ideally stabilized and mirrored by loving caretakers. Children do not have autonomous nervous systems. The child's nervous system isn't developmentally ready yet to conduct huge amounts of energy alone. It's inside of the bond with parents or with community, with the village, that children stabilize a sense of self. So, our big expressions of anger, of excitement, of fear, or sadness, or love and joy, all of these big feelings are stabilized, Taurus, and made safe and secure to be part of our identity when they are lovingly reflected. When it's lovingly reflected, we have confidence and we generally feel okay inside of these passions in our lives. Alternately, and inevitably in some way for everyone at varying degrees of trauma, we aren't validated or mirrored in our experience, and thus we don't develop a stable frame or self-concept around those particular experiences. So these major, significant parts of our naturalness, right? A lot of the kind of spiritual concept of the inner child, I like how Shaman Durek talks about it, where he says that the inner child is God, right? Like there's something, Leo kind of has that energy too, of it's like where we are creators, where we're creative, but that reflects and mirrors the creator. And so that part of us that has a creative impulse is a pathway to being in connection with God. And that's a lot to stabilize inside of our human. And so when these really significant parts of our naturalness, our capital S self, are not made secure or safe, right? You're not going to belong in the family, in the community. You can't act out this way without being punished or shamed. You can't have a tantrum at the grocery store without being told to stop, etc. Like inevitably, these parts of us can go into shadow, which kind of brings up the Scorpio archetype. And these things become edgy, taboo, inaccessible, or split off from us, right? Like there's an Aquarian connection here to trauma also. And because of like what I think is actually such a miracle with Leo and with soul retrieval is that these parts of us that were not held or reflected or mirrored don't go away. They just go into hiding and they become part of our subconscious and they create some trouble for us in that way. But they don't die, they don't go away. And I think that's really profound that when you have like an inner child healing experience, when you connect with something essential about you, it's like it's still there. It can be very tender, that journey of reintegrating it into the present day self, but it actually still exists. And there's something very enduring about the fixity of that. So we can retrieve these split off parts of ourselves, and it becomes significant to do so both along a spiritual journey and an embodiment journey. We either have a disconnect from those parts or we develop false selves, these performative masks, performative selves that were a survival tool to belong in childhood and in society. And we just kind of get lost in those character roles. We might put on the affect of helpfulness, of dominance and bravado, of seduction, of talent, whatever the coping mask is, which may not be entirely inauthentic, but there's something off about it. And we do this in order to secure safety, love, resources, etc. in life. And from an embodiment perspective, there is a dissonance inside of this. The thing that is being expressed or emoted or created through our physical vessel is not like the full deep thing. There's like some program that's running. And these affects might be successful for us, they might even look good, but you can feel, perhaps, or some might be fooled, the dissonance or the inauthenticity that's happening. Honestly, a lot of the world operates at this level. Entire social constructs are expressions of it. It's often socially acceptable and celebrated. There is a, conformity thing. And There's a lot of, it's not just individuals that have trauma, cultural constructs are connected to trauma also. So you can totally live a whole life, get paid, have a job, have a family, etc., inside of a very performative way of being, but it's not, embodied. And when people think about sex or self-expression or confidence, ideally we think these things should be fun, or we think that fun itself should be easy to access, and that there's something wrong with us if we're not able to let go, to play, to be spontaneous, etc. But if you bring it back to it's natural for the child to emote and have a big, expressive, emotional life and not be self conscious. It's learned as a form of developmental and cultural trauma to dim these things or to modify them. And so, if we're on some kind of reclamation journey of our capacity to have fun or our capacity to feel sexually dynamic and creative, our ability to feel joyful, it's like also recognizing that there are some things that have gotten in the way of that, and that we don't necessarily just dust these things off without a whole process. There might be a lot of grief or things to feel on the way to connect back to being with ourselves. Also, it's worth saying that feeling really expressive and alive, you don't necessarily get to cherry pick what emotions you want to feel. There's basically like um, if our expression is a fractal of God, and it's true for you to be in a moment of sadness and you let yourself be just sad all the way, and then you have this powerful cry and it opens up your universe and your body dilates and you feel this deep gratitude or connection to life. It's like um, emotions and our big experiences all can be super life-giving and life-affirming, but we have learned to be afraid of them, to be afraid of ourselves, because these experiences haven't been held and stabilized developmentally, not by other people. And then currently, it's that journey to find our own self holding, right? And also acknowledging that this happens in community or with other people whose relationality or holding toward us allows us to retrieve these lost parts. So, the embodiment journey in Leo is about finding a way to connect expression to what is actually happening internally, to be able to spontaneously emote and be very present, as opposed to being in a role, a performance, or a mask. This is also about connecting to something original within our essence that we were separated from due to the trauma of not being empathized with, mirrored, or connected to developmentally. Okay, on to Scorpio. And maybe you've already heard Scorpio through the conversation so far because we've been talking about the shadow or the deep unconscious. And that, yeah, that constellates Scorpio. Scorpio is connecting here to depth psychology and our deepest emotional fixations, our obsessions, our addictions, and patterns. This is also our need to merge or to energy exchange. While in Taurus, we encounter more of a kind of self-reliance, though it's hard to draw the line ultimately, the concept's a little bit abstract, right? Like there is our own survival instinct and ability to navigate the world. But we only survived as babies because we were taken care of. People don't survive on their own. There is an energy exchange in the environment in terms of eating things. So there isn't this existence in isolation, but rather a network and community. But still, if you can make the separation, Taurus is more on the polarity of self-reliance and personal assets that we then can trade. And Scorpio is that process of merging. And it's also that experience of connecting with essences things, people that feel very beyond our current um, capacity. Even if we're drawn to someone who actually is just really loudly embodying something that we have put into shadow. And so we're drawn and attracted to them because we know that connecting with them, we will exchange codes and we will osmose some parts of that person through a deeper connection to them. So, this kind of osmosis or this merging happens with experiences, with people, with teachings, with books, with whatever we get, obsessed about. We are basically merging. If you really like an artist or an author and you just absorb their canon of work, this is a way of forming a really deep bond with something beyond yourself. Here we can consider the depth of our relationships and how they interface with our sense of self, how deeply we can feel our experience, and how psychologically or energetically refined we can be in the deep experience of life. Alternately, this is where we get swampy and entangled. So there's a strong impulse in Scorpio to invest or divest energy. It's both the ability to bond and it's also the ability to cut away or sever. And we often have some unconscious patterns or attachments around how we do or don't do this, what we cling on to and will not let go of, even when it becomes toxic, or our overeagerness to burn bridges and cut things off. However it is that we are relating to the erotic life force current that's moving through us and how we're choosing to put it in things, place it in experiences. If you have some big feelings that come up and you turn to an addiction, if you turn to alcohol or you turn to a bunch of chattiness to kind of diffuse the intense feelings, like whatever it is, it's like there's this current that's moving through us, and then we're deciding one, how we can even just hold it, Taurus. Can we hold money in our bank account, or are we so uncomfortable with it that we have to spend it immediately? Can we hold turn on in the body and like move it through our body or just like move through the day turned on? Or do we have to like find someone to have sex with like immediately to feel okay being turned on? Yeah, I hope you get my point of just like there's energy moving through the body, and what am I going to do with it? How am I going to connect to the world around me? And so, from an embodiment perspective, if we think back to Taurus being our relationship with self esteem and self worth, with Scorpio, we're looking at if our investments are cultivating and affirming our erotic vitality and well being, or if they are siphoning or taking away from it. There's a lot of nuance here because it's not as simple as like a good person or a bad person or something like that. It's like the way that we're showing up to exchange. And across Taurus and Scorpio, there can be a really deep creation of mutual enhancement, or there can be dynamics of extraction. And so this can be where we use our own energy, use and abuse our energy in this inauthentic way, in this manipulative way, right? Where we drain ourselves or have an inappropriate relationship to our life force energy to try to use it or cash in on it in a way that's not really it. Or where we do that to other people or we're trying to get things from people. And the reality across Taurus and Scorpio is that we are relational creatures and that we are biological organisms who eat to survive. And so energy exchange is part of survival. And when we are really deeply stuck in scarcity patterns, survival, or power games, we can be more limited in how we are able to play Leo, the game of life, where we're kind of playing these shadowy games with ourselves and with other people to get things or to get by, versus where we can become bigger than that. And it's not that we stop being human or stop having needs or hungers, but that we develop a bigger capacity to be with them and to invest energy really intentionally. Then moving on to Aquarius. This sign relates to our ability to conduct energy, right? It's the water bearer. It's that experience maybe where you get ideas more easily in the shower or by waterfalls where there's running water, there's like an electrical current. And so when you're having an experience, how free is it to move through your body? How free are you to make connections versus where do you get locked or stuck because of an irritant or a trigger, right? Or like if you play a game of like tapping into your breath and sending your breath to different parts of your body, noticing how that feels, right? How it feels to send life energy to different parts of you. Sometimes, and I know this personally, it can bring up a lot of anxiety. It's like, well, I haven't like just tuned into my stomach like this. Like, this is a lot to be with, or, tuning into my heart or what have you. And kind of opening up that ability to conduct energy and to create communication across a network is super Aquarian. And this is a vast and increasing network. Like the fixed signs can get stuck, Aquarius can become rigid or have a very fixed, idea of reality. And then our experience has to get sorted through that paradigm and that understanding. And that can create limitations versus the incredible breakthroughs and freedom that happen when we're able to make connections in this increasing network. So I've been thinking about Aquarius a lot, like having so many new downloads about it. We just had Aquarius season, but also Pluto's in Aquarius. And I was thinking a lot about how humans are limited, like we're limited for each other, right? Like our families don't hold us perfectly when we're young. There's a trauma, right? And if you're feeling alone or lonely, you may not find saviorship in another person or the perfect relationship. So Aquarius is also about our relationship to the non-human world. It's our relationship to plants and herbs and crystals and the sky and the trees, the rivers, right? And like this just bigger expansion of like, if we're thinking Taurus, like how can I resource? Aquarius is the ability to expand that network. Aquarius is also about developing bandwidth or the capacity to be with experiences or to integrate shocks. It's connected to electricity, lightning. So integrating shocks is like our system being able to hold the charge as opposed to being totally blown out of range. I think that this has become more talked about. Like first embodiment seemed like being calm, being regulated, but then that became really dry. That became really like bloodless, and it's like, what about the embodiment of passion, of excitement, of anger? Can the body hold charge, right? That you don't just have to be mellow and detached to be embodied. And so I think Aquarius is also about, yeah, that ability to send shock through the system and let it awaken and vitalize us. This is our capacity to find the treasure in triggers. So Taurus, Scorpio is in treasure and triggers, Aquarius relating to shock, trauma, electricity, and therefore triggers. This is our nervous system with Aquarius. I find that Aquarius is huge for embodiment, even though this isn't always named so directly, and we might go to Taurus as the more go-to sign for embodiment. But this here in Aquarius is about energy being able to move freely or where it's stuck and stagnant. And it can be stuck and stagnant because of a kind of Taurian unreceptiveness. It can be stuck because of a Leo split. It can be stuck because of an emotional wound, and it can be stuck because our paradigm can't digest it. For whatever the reason, though, can energy move freely? Where is it getting stuck? This is about the nerves being able to communicate with each other. So I want to share a little story about that. Is that I'm taking a training. It hasn't started yet, but in sexological bodywork. And one of the books that we have to read before the training starts is about the wheel of consent. I don't have it on me right now, so I don't have the title for you. It's like the art of receiving and giving, the wheel of consent, something like that. And it talks about these different like games that you can play that to begin with aren't sexual. It's just learning different ways to engage consent when it comes to touch. So, for example, the type of touch that is to serve another person and their desires, or the type of touch that is for our own pleasure. And the author was speaking to the way that for a lot of people, touching another person for their pleasure feels normal. That feels like, what a good person is supposed to do in a relationship, etc. But touching another person for our own pleasure has some baggage or charge to it. Or some people can't even feel that right away, that they feel pleasure vicariously through touching a person and bringing that other person into a pleasurable state. And there was an activity in the book where basically you pick up a inanimate object that has no sentimental value or meaning. It could be a pen or a cup or something just basic. And you practice touching it and bringing pleasure into your fingertips, that you can actually connect neurologically, wake up this connection that's probably been asleep or hasn't learned how to talk. Like these parts haven't learned how to talk, but how to wire the pleasure center in your brain to your fingertips such that it's really pleasurable for you to touch this inanimate object. And I tried it. I was really, for some people, she was saying in the book, it takes a while, you have to try for a while. I've been doing little embodiment activities or a lot of embodiment stuff in games for some time. So I was able to feel it pretty quickly, but it was wild how revolutionary it was. It's like my whole world shifted. I was at the laundromat and I was alone here in Crete. And I was just like, started with touching this little jar and then I was like running my fingertips across the table. And then I just felt this whole wave of creativity move through my body in this totally unexpected, magical way. So, this ability to expand our network and for different parts of the network to communicate with each other shows up in embodiment because we might not have really formed. Aquarius is like detachment or witness consciousness or observer consciousness. And so a person might be touching us or we could be touching ourselves, but we're not really bringing our attention to where our fingers are meeting our skin. Maybe we're dissociated. And until we develop that kind of presence or witnessing of sensation, we might feel a little bit more numb or offline. And then we can feel kind of increasing sensation. And then this changes, for example, the need for intense friction and speed, sexually speaking, to kind of get sensation. There is something going on with reception and attention where it's like the need for speed and intensity is covering something up. And so slowing down Taurus and developing connection to sensations, even in the moments where they don't feel particularly loud or passionate or exciting or interesting, starts to build suppleness in the body. This practice of of tuning in our attention to sensations is really new for a lot of people because we're so, I mean, depending on the culture, because this is not true of every culture, but Western white culture, like maybe to start out with, is very kind of like neck up. It's very heady. And so asking someone, like, what do you feel in your body right now? When people are practiced tuning into that question, they can drop in faster or they can say, I feel like a stretching sensation across my sternum. I feel a heat and a sharpness sinking into my gut. Versus when people aren't practiced with that question and they say, I feel sadness in my heart. And then it's like, well, what's the sensation? How do you know it's sadness? Does it have a temperature? Right? Like, is it pulsing? Is it sharp? Is it dull? Like, just tuning into the sensation and detaching it from the story or the interpretation. And once people gain that skill, there's a certain kind of play or sensuality that can open up inside of that because when we put attention on a physical sensation that we're having, that is really similar to the big experience of the inner child being seen and validated. Because often when we have a big sensation, we have these kind of limited paradigmatic responses to it of, I'm in pain, something's wrong, I need to be fixed, I need to make it go away, I need to kill this feeling. And so we don't sit with it. And sometimes if you just are present with pain, sometimes pain is speaking to a problem or something that needs more of an emergent response. But sometimes pain is just a sensation traveling through. And if you tune into it and feel it, it opens and there's a process or an emotion or like a waking dream that's happening inside of it. And so this could also expand into intimacy and sexuality in terms of being able to follow currents of sensation in kind of an emergent, creative, playful way, as opposed to following a routine script. Aquarius is about paradigm, and paradigms can get stuck or locked into place and can be opened, expanded, developed. Our embodiment exists in a kind of paradigm, in the sense of how we interpret our sensations and what laws we have made around them. If we don't feel safe and secure, Taurus, and stable, Taurus, inside of particular emotions, they're going to register, one is something that's like part of our subconscious, Scorpio. But then when it makes its way to the surface, as it will when we get triggered, we experience it as nerve-wracking and as out of range in Aquarius. This then limits how freely we can move through our life, right? Instead of being able to be free to play and engage life spontaneously, we start to filter ourselves through a maze of where am I okay going? I'll just hang out in this corner, but I'm not going to go out into the open expanse. I'm not going to enter the center of the party, or there's that person over there I don't want to run into, or there's this relational conflict I don't want to feel. And we start to create kinks in the maze of how energy could flow freely. If conflict is scary, we'll behave in relationships in a different way than if conflict has successfully been stabilized as a higher sensation that our nervous system and personal paradigm feels okay inside of. So, more like abstractly and spiritually, one of my recurring dreams is of parties. I dream about house parties or parties on the street all the time. And I've thought a lot about this or felt into it. And I think about these different moments in my life where I feel free to move through a room or feel free to play, right? Or I can experience like what freedom I have in my life and that I can go play in it, that I can go create in it, versus where I'm stuck internally and scared internally and don't want to enter the party, don't want to play, don't want to be in life. And whatever those hangups are, this I think is pretty universal in that if life is a game, there's some layers first where life does not feel like a game. It feels very serious. It feels very not full of freedom, or we don't even know what the game is that we're playing. We don't know what the rules are, so we don't know how to win. When you upgrade to different levels of the game and gain more freedoms or more possibilities, then there's the question of, well, how will you take up space inside of it? How do you embody the place that you're in this moment of your life? How do you play within the constraints that you have and meet those constraints until they start to soften and melt? Like all of these just kind of like we're thinking out a little bit more abstract and bigger here of how free are you to engage possibilities in life? And that is also an embodiment question because you might have the technical or practical freedom, but you might not feel safe stepping into it because of your own personal paradigm, nervous system, etc. And whether the method is to develop security and then take the risk, or to jump into the fray, take the risk, and open inside of it, it's still that same question of like, how can I play Leo inside of this space, Aquarius, that I made for myself? Aquarius and Leo can relate to our nervous system suppleness to be able to experience different types of theater in life. So, as I've been saying, being embodied isn't about feeling downregulated and calm per se. It can also be about creativity and liveliness inside of a whoosh of passionate or activated energy. I hope you found this enlightening. I am going to just leave it here. You can reflect further on this that when you play with these four different archetypes and start to blend and contrast them, they reveal mysteries of the body, of the universe, of life. And yeah, I've been passionate about thinking about the fixed signs for years, and I'm not sure it will ever lose its magic to me because it just gets deeper and richer because these signs hold imprints. So the more that you cultivate it, if you have an embodiment practice, if you play with intuitive movement, if you play with pleasure, if you play with like body-based creativity, if you play with your sexuality, it can just get deeper and deeper and deeper. Not that you don't run up against blocks and limitations and obstacles, but then as you integrate those, it's also super expansive. So I think the fixed signs are erotic and magical as fuck. I'm just going to drop a few things here for you to consider if you want to go deeper with any of this. One is that I teach an evolutionary astrology intensive, and it's a profound and amazing program. It's about learning the language of astrology for yourself so that you feel your own personal connection and voice with astrology. This is something I'm able to teach people because I offer the building blocks, like an invitation, an introduction to the archetypes and the pieces. I teach you how to put it together, but how to feel and filter it through your own experience so that you're having a conversation with the signs, with the cosmos, so that astrology is not just academic, but it's something that you can really feel. So if you want to develop this language, whether it's to use it professionally or it's for your own personal enrichment, the next Evolutionary Astrology Intensive begins April 8th. I'm leaving the link in the course notes for you to read more about it, read student testimonials, and apply. I do have some scholarships available, especially for BIPOC. The other thing is that I am offering consults specifically about the fixed signs and asteroid Eros. Given that the fixed signs tell stories about erotic life force and creativity, their stagnation, and their liberation. Life force largely flows through the mazes that we give it, the mazes that we inherited or fall into, to the new pathways that we carve and allow. So this consult about Eros and the fixed signs is an exploration of aliveness in your natal chart, an exploration of pattern breaking, stagnant channels and loops and inner mazes, and an exploration of the deeper creative dream in the chart. as we've been exploring in this episode, these 4 signs, whether you have them, we have planets in them, or just have houses that are ruled by them, these houses, these signs in the chart will relate to our personal paradigm on what types of life force energy patterns we sustain, block, make taboo, creatively unleash, cultivate, and create. There's an inner revolutionary momentum when we understand and cultivate our creative life force and invest it in the pathways that are truly meaningful, playful, erotic, and valuable to us. Inevitably, we have holding patterns, emotional addictions or loops, or survival and trauma patterns that we also feed our life force energy to. We have unconscious grooves and mazes that are stubborn, hold a lot of power and energy, and are not incapable of change or redirection. So the fixed signs and how they're at play in our chart, even if only by house, offer codes around our creative liberation. I'm offering these readings from a vantage point of being personally devoted to and fascinated by these topics astrologically, as well as across other disciplines and healing modalities. Follow the link in the show notes to book one of those sessions. I also would highly encourage you, if you aren't on my mailing list, to join, because that's how I share updates. That's how I share, when I write things that don't make it to the podcast or YouTube, I pretty much don't even post them on the internet. They just go to my mailing list. So that's a way to hear from me in writing also. And I have things like currently some low-cost EFT, emotional freedom technique sessions that will open up again to my mailing list. Usually that's where I send it first and they book up really fast. So yeah, especially now in this moment where people are leaving social media and like social media is getting kind of weird. I'm grateful for the podcast and YouTube as a way to keep in touch with you, but I also would just super invite you to join the mailing list to stay in touch. Yeah, so I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you enjoyed feeling into the fixed signs. They are so rich. I'm obsessed. I love talking about it, and I would love to explore it in your chart with you if you are feeling that call to go deeper, or have you in the 5-month evolutionary astrology intensive and have you go through your own. It's an all levels course, so it is for beginners as well as more advanced students. I've had a mix every time I teach it. It will deepen your experience of astrology and of the cosmos wherever you're starting from. So I really encourage you to read and learn more about it on the course page, apply, and we'll get on a call to see if the class is a fit for you. All right, all my love.